So in one of my previous build videos, I went over an Earthen Cataclysm build that allows you to do all endgame content. You can do everything in Torment 12, you can do any of the endgame bosses, and you can do 120 plus pit runs, so you can farm pretty much everything you want to do with a Cataclysm focused build. That's quite a unique build in how it works. And in this video, I want to go over a bit of an edited version of that I think is not only a little bit stronger, but I also think is a bit easier to play, and when you play it better, it's actually even stronger than previously. Now to start, we have to go over how the damage of this build actually scales, because it is Cataclysm focused and most of your damage is coming from Cataclysm. But how do you actually scale its damage? First off, Might of the Urzine. You gain 13% bonus damage for each stack of Resolve while in Werebear, and you gain 1 Resolve per 1 second while in Werebear. So essentially how this works is Cataclysm can't be a Werebear skill, but we only need to be in Werebear to get this damage bonus. So you cast Cataclysm, you instantly cast a skill that puts you in a Werebear, and you will get the full damage bonus of this. We can have 58 stacks of Resolve, so it's over 700% damage increase pretty much just at all times, and that's only the first way in which we scale. The second way is actually through our Paragon Boards, which is also a bit unique because usually you don't get this big of damage increases from your Paragon Boards, and the node we're looking at is Ancestral Guidance. Now after spending 75 Spirit, you deal increased damage. That does give us damage increases, but the main thing, your ultimate skills deal 1% increased damage per spirit when cast. Now right now I have close to 800 spirit, so it's absolutely absurd when we have a max spirit, which will pretty much always have max spirit because we have so many different ways to increase our max resource, or specifically our max spirit. And a big way in which we get a massive bonus to this is the Melted Heart of Selig. The special is damage is dealt to your primary resource before life, and the damage taken this way is drastically reduced. Now that's just the first part, and it's less important, but your primary resource is doubled and your max life is reduced by 75%. So the big thing here is your primary resource is doubled. That's how we can have like 800 spirit. Now we are super tanky in general, and while reducing your max life by 75% makes you significantly less tanky, you will also take damage to your spirit before your health. That's massively reduced, and even getting to that point because of the other defenses we have isn't super common. So we're still incredibly tanky with this build, and then we just get double our max resource, which will more than double the damage we get from ultimate. Like I mentioned, I have around 800 spirit, so that's an 800% damage increase anytime we use our ultimate, and that's primarily how we scale our Cataclysm damage. And that brings us to our Talisman. Now, I am using a mythic seal, but you don't actually need it. You just need a seal with 6 charms for this version of the build. Now, the first thing, we are going to use the Old Mountain set, which the 2 set is your Earth skills fossilize enemies, reducing their movement speed, increasing the damage you deal to them with Earth skills, stacking up 4 times. When it hits 4 stacks, it petrifies them, which makes them take increased critical strike damage. Then for the 5 set, when they're petrified, it absorbs all of the damage you're dealing to them, and then they will explode for 200% of that. So it's essentially doubling your damage you're dealing to those petrified enemies. It's building it all up, doubling it, then it spews out that damage, and that damage can AoE. So what's really nice about this set specifically is you can group everything up and they'll all get petrified pretty quickly, and then they all blow up, hitting each other for 200% of the damage you dealt to all of them. So grouping things up and doing AoE to them is very, very good. The 3 set gives you damage reduction when you fossilize enemies, so that'll be up 100% of the time. And because of our variation on our Cataclysm, it is both an Earth and a Storm skill that still deals lightning damage. So I think it's a very unique skill that can allow for those 3 things to be true. So the 5 set of the Old Mountain, and then we are going to be using the Blood Mad Idol for our unique charm. Now this one's pretty good and gives a pretty massive damage increase, and because we're so tanky, the downside of this isn't too bad. So you are always berserking. That's just what this does. You're always berserking. So that's 25% increased damage, 15% increased movement speed, a very good buff, but you take 200% increased damage as burning over 8 seconds. So now you take double damage, but all of the damage dealt to you is done over 8 seconds. So you do have a bit more time to not get one shot. And because we're so tanky, just super tanky anyway, so this really isn't going to be killing you a ton. But while burning, berserking grants an additional up to 100% increased multiplicative damage. So you're always berserking, so you get the 25% increase, and you can get up to another 100% 10%. Now the burning portion of this that gives you the damage increase is just any damage you take. So let's say you take 5 damage from an enemy, it'll make you take 10 damage, but over 8 seconds. And that 8-second dot on you is what is burning. So you just have to take any damage and you'll get the massive damage increase from this. So this will give us massive damage increases, and because we're so tanky anyway, the downside of this really won't matter a ton. In fact, it's actually easier to stay alive in some situations because the damage is spread out over that 8 seconds. Very, very big damage increase. And then that brings us into our skill tree, starting with Stone Burst, and a change going from the previous build is we were putting 15 points into this because we have more regen, so we can spam this now, and we'll go over why we can spam it. It's generally just for increased damage, but also allows us to do some additional stuff, and it just gives us additional damage. It's not crazy, but over time, especially on a boss, the additional damage can help. Top upgrade reduces its spirit cost. Bottom upgrade, you get increased armor while it's channeling, but if you're just spam using it, it will keep the armor on you. You also gain 5% additional armor for each stack of resolve, so it's over 200% increased armor. Pretty ridiculous. Then make sure it's a werebear skill, so it can always turn yourself into a werebear, and we're taking Living Stone. Stone Burst is cast at a target location and grows by itself, detonating after 3 seconds. You can only have one up at a time. So how this works, when you're in AoE situations, you usually just keep this out and let it grow by itself and just make sure to reuse another one every 3 seconds. When you're in single target, specifically against a boss, you're spam using this. The main reason for this is because it's not the biggest AoE, so you want it to just grow, and while it's growing, it also does AoE damage. You can spam it when in AoE situations as well. More specifically, when you group everything up, you can spam this to do even more damage on them. This will also help proc a bunch of additional effects, and again, do a little bit of additional damage. Then we're going to Earthern Bulwark, 15 points into this because of our variation, and our variation, it gives us 3 stacks of resolve. That really doesn't matter anymore, but Earthern Bulwark constantly summons these tectonic spikes that deal some decent damage to enemies around us. Now, specifically when you're against one target, because it only spawns the spikes in one area, so when enemies are grouped and when you're against a single target, the damage of this can actually build up pretty nicely because it's earth damage, which will proc some additional things, and because of our set bonus, all of the damage from our Cataclysm, our Stone Burst, and this variation of Earthern Bulwark all will build up into the target. These are our main damaging abilities, so they'll build up into the target to all explode for double the damage they've dealt. So you're essentially scaling all of the damage from all of this, and this allows you to petrify everything very, very quickly. And we're not going to be having Earthern Bulwark on a bar. It procs through our rune set, which will just be passively procking at all times. Then we increase the duration to 12 seconds, which does work on our rune set, and increase its base absorption to 60% of your max life. Bottom upgrade is Unstoppable, so every time this procs, it gives us Unstoppable for 2 seconds. This will proc one of the new items we're using as well, which gives us a lot of spirit regen and more damage. Then we're using Cyclone Armor. This will be on our bar. Top upgrade increases its radius. Bottom upgrade increases resistance bonus for this. Then the variation we're taking is Reversal, and now pulls everything in a pretty large radius. So again, we want to pull everything in so we can petrify it all, then it all blows up and destroys everything in AoE. Then we're taking Debilitating Roar, which is just a damage reduction to everything around us. One upgrade, it gives us increased max life when it's active, which will be all the time, so there's more survivability. The other upgrade increases its duration, even more fortified. The variation we're taking just increases all of its effects and duration, so you put enough points into it so it's up 100% of the time. That's basically it. Another way to get into Werebear if you need it, which you kind of don't, but generally just a massive damage reduction. Then we're actually taking 2 companion skills. This is for a couple different things. First off, because we have so many companions here, that is the rune we'll be using. So we just have companions that will build up to proc our Earthen Bulwark. So our Earthen Bulwark procking is completely passive, and it just procs every single time, every 5 seconds. So incredibly strong, but we're taking Poison Creeper because we can poison things, which really isn't that important anymore, but it can deal some small amount of additional damage. The big reason we're taking this is Fortify, which is a passive. When you have Poison Creeper just on your bar, you gain 10 Fortify every 3 seconds. We have a legendary aspect that increases our damage while Fortify. This is how we fortify. Then we have our Ravens. So again, we just have more Ravens so we can proc our Earthen Bulwark passively. Bottom upgrade, you just get more Ravens, but the variation turns it into a Storm skill. Now, activating this does stun enemies, which does help to stun enemies and to help stun bosses even more quickly, but this is a Storm skill, and one of our legendary aspects, we get different buffs, casting a Storm skill or Earth skill. So we have another Storm skill alongside of Cyclone Armor, so this will allow us to keep that passive up, which actually is 70% increase to our Cataclysm, essentially. So these companion skills are for a couple of different things, but they're generally just massive buffs. Then we have Cataclysm, 15 points into it, our main damaging ability. Upgrade 1 increases duration. The bottom upgrade upgrade, it gives us ferocity when we use it. This is just because we really don't have a ton to use our points on, and ferocity is attack speed, so it can help with some additional things. Make sure it's a werewolf skill. This will actually help with some additional things. Then the upgrade we're taking is tectonic spikes because it becomes an earth skill. It also spawns tectonic plates around enemies, but the earth skill scaling is pretty important from this variation. Then for our Paragon boards, the first board is Headhunter, a bonus to normal nodes within range. Secondary is increased damage to elites. Legendaries is increased damage. The first board is Lust for Carnage. Critical strikes with werewolf skills, restore 2 spirit, and deal increased damage. Now, as we just went over, Cataclysm is a werewolf skill. All this needs is for the skill to have the werewolf tag on it, and it gets the bonus from Lust for Carnage. And that also stays even when we go into Werebearer. All it needs is a tag. So this is just a big damage increase and spirit restore with Cataclysm. The glyph we're taking is Keeper, a bonus to all rare nodes within range. Secondary is you deal increased non-physical damage. Legendary is increased non-physical damage. Going over to the left, we are taking Earthen Devastation. Your earth skills deal increased critical strike damage. As we went over our main damaging abilities, so main Cataclysm is an earth skill. We also have Stone Burst and Earthen Bulwark, which both deal damage as well, and those will get the damage increase from this. Then we have Earth and Sky, a bonus to magic nodes within range. The secondary is nature skills do increase damage to vulnerable enemies. Legendary is increased nature magic damage. Then we're going all the way over to the right. We already went over Ancestral Guidance. The glyph is Spirit, increased critical strike damage. When you critically strike an enemy, they take increased damage from you, stacking up. Legendaries increase critical strike damage. Then we're going over to the middle and back up. Then the board we're taking is Thunderstruck. Storm skills do increased damage and give increased critical strike chance. Now, because Cataclysm is also a storm skill, this affects it as well. Like I mentioned, Cataclysm is quite unique in that it can be a storm skill, an earth skill, a werewolf skill, and it still deals lightning damage. So it can get some pretty massive buffs. Then the glyph we're taking is Electrocution, a bonus to lightning bolts specifically because the lightning strikes from our Cataclysm are considered lightning bolts. The secondary is when enemies are damaged by it, they take increased damage from you. Legendary is increased lightning damage. And then that brings us to our spirit boons. We're taking Gift of the Stag, a max spirit increase. So it's a massive damage increase. Keep in mind, any max spirit you get, you double it. So this is a 60% damage increase for our Cataclysm. Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage. Calamity to extend the duration of our ultimate by 35%. That's very good. Then we have Obsidian Slam. When you cast an earth skill, gain resolve. And when you lose or gain resolve, gain increased earth skill damage. Now what's super nice about this is I'm pretty sure the tectonic plates from Earthen Bulwark and our Cataclysm are considered casting an earth skill. So you'll see, you just pop Cataclysm and walk around, your resolve stacks fly up very quickly. And that's important because a lot of our damage and our survivability are through resolve stacks. Then we have Combo for the Storm, which is a lucky hit, has a chance to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate. Now this doesn't proc a ton, but it procs enough to make it actually valuable. Now if you need more survivability, go for Iron Feather. But like I mentioned, because of one of the new legendary aspects that was fixed recently, our survivability is pretty crazy. Then we have our mercenaries. Since we don't really need survivability, I'm going Subo primarily for the tracking, but this bottom passive here, when Subo hits enemies with cover fire, they take increased critical strike damage from you, is nice, especially against bosses, and this build is, I'd say, weakest against one singular small target. Then you can use whatever for reinforcement. I'm just using Altkin, Fields of Anguish on any cast, makes enemies slowed, and makes them deal reduced damage. Then that brings us into our gear. We already went over one of our mythics in the Melted Heart of Selig. Also, for the legendary aspect on your necklace, remember you can transfigure a legendary aspect. You want storm skill damage, makes enemies vulnerable, and you deal increased vulnerable damage or increased damage to vulnerable enemies. This just makes everything vulnerable at all times and gives us a big damage increase. Then for our helmet, our other mythic, we're using Air Perdition. Crit chance roll is massive and just a massive 80% multiplicative damage increase. Air Perdition is used on everything. Then for our other uniques, we already went over Might of the Urzine. A pretty big change going into this is Tabalt's Will. You deal increased damage and gain 50 primary resource regeneration while unstoppable and for 5 seconds after. Now, like I mentioned, Earthen Bulwark is recast every 5 seconds because it gives us unstoppable every time it's cast. We will get this effect every 5 seconds. So passively, this will be up 100% of the time, which means a damage increase. And this is actually 50 primary resource per second for that whole 5 seconds. And this mixed with another piece of regen we have absurd spirit regen with these two mixes. So that's how we can spam stone burst as much as we want now. So it's a pretty big change going into this build. We also get to change and just have unstoppable now, which is pretty nice. Every time Earthen will walk recasts itself every 5 seconds, we get more unstoppable, which is super nice because sometimes you get stunned and we didn't have a way to unstoppable ourselves previously. Then finally, flicker step, evade through enemies, reduces your ultimate cooldown. Super important. You can pull everything together, evade through them, and get massive ultimate reduction. This is a main way in which we get back into our ultimate at all times. Then for our legendary aspects, since we aren't using a one-hander, everything besides our ring that is an offensive slot, so both our weapons and our gloves, you could put the offensives anywhere you want, but we have while fortified, deal increased damage, will always be fortified. We have casting an ultimate skill, increase your damage for 8 seconds, and gain 2 ultimate ranks. That's why we're using this, because this is generally better than most other legendary aspects, because 2 ultimate ranks is pretty good damage increase. Just casting your ultimate gives more damage for 8 seconds. Then on our gloves, casting a storm skill gives your earth skill 70% increased critical strike damage. Casting an earth skill gives you 20% storm crit chance. So because we have Stone Burst where we can infinitely cast, we'll always have 20% increased crit chance for our Cataclysm, meaning we don't need as much crit chance on our gear. And then because we have multiple other storm skills, specifically Cataclysm itself, our Cyclone Armor, and our Ravens that are a storm skill, all of those will proc this. So we cycle through our storm skills to get the increased earth damage, and we just spam Stone Burst to get the crit chance. Then for our final offensive aspect, which has to be on a ring, your max spirit is increased by 50. Remember, you double that, so this is 100 max spirit, 100% damage increase for our Cataclysm, which is massive, and you gain up to 35 spirit regen per 8 seconds. So that's another up to 35 spirit per second, which will be up basically 100% of the time. So we have over 80 spirit per second between both of these. That's how we have basically unlimited spirit. Then for our final legendary aspect, on your chest piece, you want your max resolve is increased by 2, so a damage increase, and gain 4% damage reduction per resolve. We have 58 seconds of resolve. That's 4% damage increase times 58. You can see how ridiculous this gets. This is why we are actually so tanky. This is why we could do a bunch of other changes to this build, because of this one legendary aspect gives us ungodly amounts of tankiness. Now that brings us into our gems. In your weapons, you want lightning damage multiplier. Now in your jewelry, this one's a bit weird. I'm using resist all, but because we are using the blood mad idol, which technically makes all the damage you take burning damage, you could just use fire resistance gems in your jewelry. Now I did look at that and went into it, but because we already have so much resistances, specifically just because we have resistances through our Paragon boards, through our gear, we have a pretty big increase from our Cyclone Armor. You're actually hitting diminishing returns pretty heavily if you do that. And if I'm not mistaken, unless this has changed, you still get defensives from all of your other resistances. I'm pretty sure it still gets reduced when it hits you, even though it turns it all into a burning effect. Now, I'm not 100% certain on how exactly all of that damage reduction and everything scales now, but I just kept with diamonds just because diminishing returns if you go off fire gems was pretty massive. So until I learn something different, I don't think there's going to be a big issue with just taking diamond gems. Then in one piece of armor, you want increased willpower, and for your rune sets, we take Naga Q, which maintain at least one active summon for 5 seconds. This will gain offering up to 5 summons every 5 seconds. So with our poison creeper and our crows, we just get earthenable walk every 5 seconds passively. Our other set is store offering every 0.3 seconds. Cast a non-basic skill to gain that. This will give us +1 to all skills for 10 seconds. This can go up to 3. So pretty much every time this builds up, we will just get +3 to all skills pretty much always in combat, which is also super nice for Cataclysm. And it will have all of the best stats you want in the build planner, but make sure on your helm, your chest, your legs, and your amulet to get the tempering to max resolve stack increases, and make sure to masterwork that through the masterworking system as well. So it's 12 max resolve stacks on 4 different pieces. That's how we can have 58 resolve stacks. That's an absurd damage reduction, which is our main survivability, and that's one of our main damage scalers. But that's the entirety of this build. Like I mentioned, when I first went over this build, it's quite unique. I'm very surprised it's this strong, and I think with this variation, it's even stronger. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.